No one noticed her when she slipped into the penthouse elevator at midnight. That was the rule. No names. No questions. No future. She was just the woman who came after the lights went off. And tonight, she had no idea her life was about to shatter. Ava Lennox stood alone in the mirrored elevator, her reflection staring back at her like a stranger she barely recognized. Her black coat hid a simple dress beneath it. Nothing flashy, nothing that suggested she belonged anywhere near the top floor of one of the most expensive residential towers in Manhattan. The security guard downstairs hadn't even looked up. That was how invisible she was. And how he wanted it. The elevator chimed softly as it climbed higher, the city falling away beneath her feet. Ava pressed her fingers together, steadying her breathing. She told herself the same lie she told herself every time. This doesn't mean anything. It's just temporary. You're in control. But her heart never believed it. When the doors opened, the hallway was silent, carpeted in thick cream fabric that swallowed the sound of her heels. At the very end waited the door she knew by memory, not by address. Penthouse B. She knocked once. The door opened almost immediately. Ethan Cross stood there barefoot, sleeves rolled up, tie discarded somewhere behind him. At 36, he was everything magazine said a self-made millionaire CEO should be: tall, broad-shouldered, sharp eyes that always looked like they were calculating 10 steps ahead. Except when he looked at her. Then something in him softened. "You're late," he said quietly. Ava smiled faintly. "You didn't complain last time." He stepped aside without another word, letting her in. The penthouse was warm, dimly lit, glass walls framing a sleeping city below. Ava had been here dozens of times, yet she still felt like a guest in a museum, touching nothing, leaving no trace. Ethan poured her a drink without asking. He always remembered how she liked it. That was the cruelest part. They didn't talk much anymore. In the beginning they had. Late-night conversations, laughter, stories whispered between stolen hours. But as weeks turned into months, words became unnecessary. Or dangerous. He crossed the room and stopped in front of her, studying her face like he was trying to memorize it. "You okay?" he asked. Ava nodded automatically. That was another lie. Because earlier that day she had been humiliated in front of a room full of people who didn't know who she was, or who she was to him. She worked at Crosstech. Not as an executive. Not as management. She was a temporary operations analyst, contract position, easily replaceable, barely remembered. That morning, during a strategy meeting she wasn't even supposed to attend, Ava had dared to speak up. "There's a flaw in the logistics forecast," she had said, voice calm but firm. "If we move forward with this supplier, we'll face a bottleneck within 6 months." The room had gone quiet. Then laughter. One senior manager had smiled condescendingly. "That's cute. But we'll let leadership handle the big decisions." Another had added, "Let's stick to note-taking, yeah?" No one defended her. Not even Ethan. He sat at the head of the table, eyes unreadable, and said nothing. Ava had swallowed her pride and written her notes like she'd been told. And that night she was here. In his bed. Invisible again. Ethan reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, familiar. "You don't have to stay," he said quietly. But they both knew she would. Because despite everything, despite the secrecy, the imbalance, the unspoken rules, he was the only person who ever looked at her like she mattered. Later, as she lay beside him in the dark, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, Ava stared at the ceiling. She didn't know when it had happened. When a temporary arrangement turned into something that hurt. She had told herself this was just physical. That she wasn't expecting anything. That she didn't need more. But somewhere between his hand finding hers in the dark and the way he whispered her name like it meant something, she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. 8 months. That was how long she had been his secret. 8 months of sneaking through service entrances, avoiding eye contact at work, pretending she didn't know him in public. 8 months of believing that if she just stayed quiet, stayed small, stayed patient, things would change. They never did. The truth came on a Thursday afternoon. Ava was sitting in the break room at Crosstech, eating lunch alone like usual, when a coworker tossed a glossy magazine onto the table. "Did you see this?" the woman said casually. "Boss finally did it." Ava barely glanced down. Then she froze. There he was. Ethan Cross. Standing in a tailored tuxedo, arm wrapped around a stunning woman with perfect hair, perfect posture, and a diamond ring so large it caught the light even on paper. The headline burned into Ava's vision. Crosstech CEO Ethan Cross announces engagement to socialite heiress Lillian Monroe, wedding planned for summer. The room tilted. Her fork clattered against the table. Engaged. Ava felt her chest tighten, her lungs refusing to work properly. 8 months. 8 months of secrecy. 8 months of being hidden. And he was planning a wedding. No warning. No conversation. No honesty. Just a headline. She stood up slowly, legs trembling, and walked out without saying a word. She didn't cry in the office. She didn't scream. She finished her shift like a ghost, smiled when spoken to, nodded when necessary. It wasn't until she reached her apartment and closed the door behind her that the truth crushed her. She slid down against the door, magazine clutched in her hand, and laughed. A broken, hollow sound. So that's what I was, she whispered to the empty room. A secret. A convenience. Something disposable. Her phone buzzed. Ethan, can you come over tonight? She stared at the screen. Then typed one word. Ava, no. The call started immediately. She didn't answer. By the next morning, her decision was made. She walked into Crosstech earlier than usual, heart pounding but spine straight. When she reached the executive floor, somewhere she was never meant to be, she didn't stop. She walked directly into Ethan's office. He looked up, relief flooding his face. Ava, thank God. I've been trying to. She placed an envelope on his desk. My resignation, she said evenly. Effective immediately. His smile vanished. What? He stood abruptly. No. Ava, wait. Let me explain. Explain what? Her voice didn't shake, even though everything inside her was breaking. That you're engaged? That I found out from a magazine instead of from you? It's complicated, he said quickly. The engagement, it's strategic. Our families. If it's meaningless, she interrupted softly, then call it off. Silence. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it. That was all she needed. I see, Ava said. I was never the plan. I was the secret you visited when it suited you. He reached for her arm. I care about you. She stepped back. If you cared, she said quietly, I wouldn't have been invisible. She turned and walked out. Out of his office. Out of the building. Out of the life she thought she was building. She didn't know yet that leaving him would cost her everything. Or that walking away would be the first step toward justice she never saw coming. The fall, when walking away cost her everything. Ava thought walking out of Ethan Cross's office would bring relief. Instead it brought silence. The kind that presses against your ears until your thoughts get louder than your breathing. By the time she reached the sidewalk outside Crosstech, the city was moving like nothing had happened. Taxis honked. People laughed. Someone spilled coffee and cursed under their breath. The world didn't pause for heartbreak. Ava stood there for a moment, resignation envelope no longer in her hands, her job no longer hers, her future suddenly blank. She felt stripped, not just of work but of identity. For 8 months her life had revolved around secrets. Now she had none. And somehow that felt worse. She went home and slept for 12 hours straight. When she woke up, reality arrived like a punch to the chest. Emails. Dozens of them. Most were automated, HR acknowledgments, contract termination confirmations, polite corporate language that translated to you no longer exist here. But one email stood out. It wasn't from Crosstech. It was from a competitor. Subject line, regarding your application. Her heart lifted for half a second. Then sank. After careful consideration, we have decided to move forward with other candidates. While your qualifications are impressive, recent circumstances have raised concerns about fit and discretion. Discretion. The word burned. Ava stared at the screen, confused. She hadn't applied there yet, not formally. She'd only had an exploratory conversation weeks ago. How did they know? By noon, 2 more rejections arrived. Then a fourth. Different companies. Same phrasing. Concerns. Timing. Reputation. By the end of the day, Ava sat frozen on her couch, laptop balanced uselessly on her knees. Something was wrong. Very wrong. 3 days later she found out how wrong. It happened at a cafe near her apartment, a place she used to visit to work quietly on her laptop. She stood in line when she noticed 2 women whispering behind her. That's her? One murmured. Are you sure? Yeah. I saw her name online. Ava turned slowly. I'm sorry, she said carefully. Do I know you? The women exchanged looks. One of them hesitated. You're Ava Lennox, right? From Crosstech. Yes, Ava replied. Formerly. The woman bit her lip. Oh, I thought, never mind. What? Ava pressed. The second woman sighed. Look, you should probably know. There's stuff going around. What stuff? They hesitated again, Then the first woman pulled out her phone and showed her a screen. Ava's stomach dropped. It was a business gossip blog. And her face was right there. Anonymous source claims former Crosstech analyst used relationship with CEO to access confidential information. Her vision blurred. The article was detailed. Too detailed. It accused her of manipulating Ethan Cross emotionally. Of leveraging intimacy for professional advantage. Of being quietly removed before an internal investigation could escalate. There were no direct quotes. Just enough implication to destroy someone quietly. "This isn't true," Ava whispered. The women nodded awkwardly. "I figured. But you know how people talk." They walked away. Ava stood there, coffee forgotten, heart hammering so hard she thought she might collapse. By the time she got home, the story had spread. LinkedIn posts. Anonymous comments. Industry forums. She refreshed her phone obsessively, watching her name become something ugly. A cautionary tale. A warning. She tried calling HR. They didn't answer. She emailed Ethan. No response. By evening her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. "Miss Lennox," a woman said coolly. "This is legal affairs from Crosstech. We advise you to refrain from contacting company leadership or discussing internal matters publicly." Ava laughed bitterly. "You're accusing me of something I didn't do." "We're not accusing," the woman replied smoothly. "We're distancing." The line went dead. That night, Ava cried for the first time since she'd left. Not quiet tears. Ugly ones. The kind that come from realizing the world is designed to protect powerful men and discard women like collateral damage. Within a week, the damage was undeniable. Recruiters stopped responding. Friends from the industry grew distant. Some avoided her altogether. Her savings dwindled faster than she expected. And still Ethan remained silent. Until he didn't. She found him waiting outside her building one evening. He looked tired. Unshaven. Wrong. "Ava," he said softly. "Please. We need to talk." She stared at him, anger burning through exhaustion. "Talk? After you let them do this?" "I didn't let anything happen," he said quickly. "I didn't know until today." She laughed. "You're the CEO. Your silence is permission." He ran a hand through his hair. "Lillian's family is influential. Things got out of control. So you chose the safe option," Ava said coldly. Again. His jaw tightened. "I never wanted you hurt. But you allowed it." That landed. He swallowed. "I'm trying to fix it." "By what?" she demanded. "Standing here? Whispering apologies." He hesitated. And Ava knew. "You're not going to publicly deny it," she said. "It's complicated." "No," she cut in sharply. "It's simple. You protect your engagement. Your image. And I disappear." She stepped back. "Please leave." He didn't argue. He just nodded. And walked away. That night, Ava sat alone in her apartment, lights off, scrolling through the comments strangers had written about her. Gold digger. Climber. Opportunist. No one asked if she was talented. No one asked if she was innocent. They had already decided who she was. By morning, something inside her hardened. She stopped crying. And started planning. Ava didn't realize she was being watched. Not yet. Across the city, in a quiet office overlooking Central Park, Lillian Monroe sat with her phone in hand, scrolling through the same article. She smiled. "Efficient," she said softly. Her assistant shifted nervously. "Are you sure this won't come back on us?" Lillian laughed lightly. "Power doesn't come back. It moves forward." She closed the article. "Make sure she doesn't resurface." Ava thought she'd already hit bottom. She was wrong. The real blow came 2 weeks later. She arrived home to find a certified letter taped to her door. Legal notice. Crosstech was accusing her of breach of confidentiality. They were demanding damages. Her knees buckled. They weren't just erasing her. They were burying her. Ava sank to the floor, letter shaking in her hands. For the first time, she wondered if leaving Ethan had been a mistake. If staying silent would have saved her. Then she remembered the way he'd looked at her in meetings. Invisible. She wiped her tears. "No," she whispered. "I won't disappear." She didn't know yet who would help her. Or how the truth would come out. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet fire had started to burn. And soon, the people who thought they had destroyed her would realize something too late. They had underestimated her. The turning point, when the invisible woman finds her power. Ava Lennox didn't sleep that night. The legal notice lay on her kitchen table like a threat with teeth. Every time she looked at it, her chest tightened. not with fear anymore but with something sharper. Anger. Not the wild kind that burns itself out. The quiet kind that thinks. At dawn, she brewed coffee she barely tasted and opened her laptop. If Crosstech wanted to accuse her of stealing confidential information, then the truth would have to be louder than their lies. She began with the only thing she still had. Her mind. Ava had always been meticulous. That was why she'd survived in rooms where no one expected her to speak. She kept records. Notes. Versions of files. Timestamps. She opened her personal cloud storage, something she'd started years ago, back when she was still trying to prove she belonged. There it was. Folders labeled by month. Emails saved automatically. Meeting notes with metadata. Drafts of strategies she had created on her own time, long before they were ever discussed in executive meetings. She leaned closer to the screen, heart pounding. If Crosstech was claiming she stole information after leaving, then timestamps would prove otherwise. Hours passed. By noon, her eyes burned and her fingers ached, but she had something. A pattern. Every document they claimed she'd taken had originated on her personal system weeks, sometimes months, before being uploaded to Crosstech servers. Not stolen. Created. She sat back slowly. This wasn't just a defense. This was proof. But proof alone wasn't enough. She needed someone who knew how to fight power without being crushed by it. That was when her phone rang. Still breathing? A familiar voice asked. Ava blinked. Marcus. Marcus Reed had been her mentor once. Quiet, observant, and dangerously intelligent. He'd left Crosstech 2 years earlier under mutual agreement, which everyone knew meant he'd refused to play along with something unethical. I saw what they're doing to you, he said. And I'm guessing you didn't steal anything. No, Ava said firmly. I didn't. Good, Marcus replied. Because if you had, I wouldn't be calling. She swallowed. Why now? Because they're sloppy when they think someone's powerless, he said. And because I owe you. They met that afternoon in a small law office that didn't advertise its location. Marcus introduced her to Diane Keller. Diane was in her late 50s, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and unimpressed by money. She didn't smile much, but when she did, it wasn't comforting. It was dangerous. I've reviewed the notice, Diane said, flipping through the pages. It's designed to scare you into silence. It's working, Ava admitted. Diane looked up. Good. Fear makes people predictable. But you're not predictable, are you? Ava hesitated. No. Diane nodded once. Then let's begin. They worked late into the evening. Ava showed them everything, timestamps, drafts, communication logs. Marcus pointed out inconsistencies in Crosstech's claims. Diane smiled thinly when she saw the timeline. They don't have a case, she said. But that's not what this is about. Then what is? Ava asked. Control, Diane replied. And distraction. She leaned forward. Someone powerful is making sure attention stays on you instead of where it belongs. Ava's mind flashed to one face. Lillian Monroe. Diane followed her gaze. The fiancé? Yes. Diane's smile sharpened. Then she's nervous. While Ava gathered evidence, the world continued judging her. Crosstech's stock dipped slightly, then stabilized. The engagement announcement trended again, this time framed as Ethan Cross, weathering personal controversy with grace. Ava's name appeared only in footnotes. Disposable. Until something unexpected happened. A journalist reached out. Her name was Naomi Park. She didn't ask for an interview. She asked for documents. I don't care about scandal, Naomi said over the phone. I care about patterns. And yours doesn't fit the story being told. Ava hesitated. Trust had become expensive. But Diane nodded once. Give her the truth, Diane said. Nothing more. Nothing less. Ava sent Naomi the files. Every timestamp. Every draft. Every quiet piece of proof that showed she wasn't a gold digger or a thief, but a strategist whose work had quietly built Crosstech's recent success. Naomi didn't publish immediately. She waited. That's what scared Ava most. Then, 3 days later, Crosstech made a mistake. They escalated. A second accusation surfaced, anonymous again, claiming Ava had manipulated internal data forecasts. The documents attached were altered. Badly. Marcus caught it within minutes. Someone rushed this, he said. They're panicking. Diane's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then slid it toward Ava. It was a draft headline. Crosstech's legal claim against former analyst shows major timeline discrepancies. Naomi had moved. The article didn't accuse. It questioned. And in corporate warfare, questions were more dangerous than accusations. By nightfall, industry insiders were whispering. By morning, Crosstech's board demanded answers. Ethan Cross woke up to chaos. He sat in his office staring at the same documents Ava had once created, the ones now threatening to expose him as either incompetent or complicit. Lillian stood by the window, arms crossed. "This is getting noisy," she said calmly. Ethan didn't respond. "You said she'd disappear," Lillian continued. "Instead, she's becoming inconvenient." He finally looked up. "You promised this would end quietly." Lillian smiled faintly. "It will. If you do what's necessary." "And what's that?" "Distance," she said. "Publicly. Completely." Ethan's chest tightened. For the first time, he understood the cost of his silence. Across the city, Ava watched the news scroll across her screen. Her name wasn't cleared yet, but it was no longer buried. For the first time since she'd walked out of that office, she felt something close to hope. Not because someone had rescued her, but because she had refused to stay invisible. The exposure, when truth walks into the room. The article went live at 7:02 a.m. Ava saw it on her phone before she even got out of bed. Naomi Park didn't use her name in the headline. She didn't need to. Timeline gaps raise questions in Crosstech legal claim against former analyst. That was all it took. By the time Ava made coffee, the article had been shared hundreds of times. By the time she sat down at her kitchen table, industry analysts were dissecting it publicly. By noon, Crosstech's boardroom was in crisis mode. What Naomi had done was surgical. She hadn't painted Ava as a victim. She had painted Crosstech as careless. Screenshots showed timestamps that didn't align. Files allegedly stolen weeks after Ava left were clearly created months earlier on personal devices. Internal approval chains were missing. Nothing screamed guilt. Everything whispered manipulation. And whispers travel faster than lies. Ava's phone rang nonstop. Former colleagues. Recruiters. People who had avoided her suddenly remembering her existence. She didn't answer any of them. Diane had warned her. "Let the truth speak first," she said. "Then you decide who gets access to you." At Crosstech, Ethan Cross sat at the head of a long glass table, surrounded by board members who no longer looked impressed. "This situation has escalated beyond expectation," one director said coldly. "We need to understand why legal action was initiated without airtight verification." Ethan's throat tightened. "We acted on information provided to us." "By whom?" another demanded. Silence. Lillian Monroe arrived late. She always did. She entered the room like she owned it, perfect posture, flawless smile, dressed for cameras even when there were none. "I understand there are concerns," she said smoothly. "Let's not overreact to speculative journalism." One board member slid a tablet across the table. "Speculative journalism doesn't fabricate metadata," he said. "This suggests intentional misrepresentation." Lillian glanced at the screen, unimpressed. "Or incompetence." All eyes shifted to Ethan. That was when he realized something crucial. They weren't protecting him. They were measuring him. Across the city, Ava watched the boardroom drama unfold through leaked commentary on financial news channels. She felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Validation. Not triumph. Just truth finding oxygen. Naomi published a follow-up that evening. This one had a name. Ava Lennox. And for the first time, it wasn't surrounded by accusation. It was surrounded by evidence. The article detailed Ava's contributions, projects she'd led, strategies she'd authored, revenue growth tied directly to her work. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. From "who is she?" to "why didn't anyone notice her?" The comments changed. So did the tone. But the real earthquake came the next morning. Crosstech announced an internal review, then suspended its legal action. Quietly. Too quietly. Naomi noticed. So did Diane. "They're trying to retreat without admitting fault," Diane said. "Which means someone is about to be sacrificed." Ava didn't need to ask who. That afternoon, Ethan Cross requested a private meeting. Diane advised against it. Ava went anyway. They met in a neutral location, a hotel conference room with glass walls and no hiding places. Ethan looked older. Smaller. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said immediately. Ava folded her arms. "Intent doesn't erase damage." "I was under pressure," he said. "From the board. From Lillian's family. From expectations I didn't create. And I was disposable," Ava replied calmly. "That's the difference." He winced. "You weren't disposable to me. But you treated me like I was," she said. "Every day you stayed silent. He leaned forward. If I speak now fully, it will cost me everything. Ava met his gaze. That's what truth does, she said. It charges interest. Ethan exhaled shakily. What do you want? She didn't hesitate. A public correction. A full acknowledgement. And my name cleared without conditions. And after that? Ava stood. That's none of your concern. He closed his eyes. The next morning the press conference was announced. No one expected what followed. Ethan Cross stood alone at the podium. No Lillian. No smiling fiancé. He didn't read from a script. I failed, he said plainly. As a leader. And as a human being. The room went silent. He acknowledged the mishandling of legal action. He admitted internal failures. He took responsibility for allowing a false narrative to grow unchecked. Then he said her name. Ava Lennox is a professional of integrity, he said. Any implication otherwise was wrong. The fallout was immediate. Crosstech's stock dipped sharply. Lillian Monroe released a statement distancing herself from the controversy. Then disappeared. For the first time in weeks, Ava breathed freely. But justice wasn't finished yet. Because truth doesn't just clear names. It exposes intentions. And soon the world would see who had truly orchestrated the damage. The reckoning, when karma arrives without apology. The silence after the press conference was louder than any accusation. For the first time in months, Ava Lennox woke up without dread tightening her chest. Her phone still buzzed, messages, emails, missed calls, but none of them felt threatening anymore. They felt late. She stood by her window watching the city wake up, realizing something profound. She had survived. Not because someone rescued her. Not because power spared her. But because she had refused to disappear. The next wave hit exactly as Diane predicted. Lillian Monroe didn't vanish by accident. She was running. Within 48 hours of Ethan's public admission, investigative journalists began pulling threads they hadn't noticed before. Naomi Park wasn't the only one asking questions anymore. Why had the anonymous accusations originated from offshore servers? Why had altered documents passed through a private legal consultancy tied to the Monroe family? Why had Crosstech's internal legal team acted so aggressively without board approval? The answers formed a picture no one could ignore. Lillian Monroe had orchestrated everything. Using influence. Using money. Using the assumption that a woman like Ava wouldn't fight back. The story broke on a Sunday morning. Heiress implicated in corporate smear campaign amid CEO scandal. This time there were no whispers. There were documents. Contracts linking Lillian to the PR firm that planted the gossip. Payments to the investigators who manipulated digital records. Emails that revealed intent, not panic but strategy. Lillian's carefully curated image shattered overnight. Charity boards quietly removed her name. Socialites unfollowed her. Business partners issued cautious statements. Power didn't protect her anymore. It isolated her. Crosstech's board moved fast. Ethan Cross resigned within the week. Not because they suddenly grew moral, but because damage control demanded a sacrifice. His final statement was brief. I accept responsibility for my failures and will step away. The man who once stood untouchable behind glass walls walked out without applause. Ava watched the footage without emotion. She didn't feel victorious. She felt free. Then came the moment she never expected. Phoenix Meridian Group, a global consultancy known for rebuilding ethical leadership, requested a meeting. Not an interview. A conversation. Ava sat across from 3 executives who didn't interrupt her once as she spoke. She told them everything, not as a defense but as a record. When she finished, the woman at the head of the table smiled. We don't need your resume, she said. We need your judgment. They offered Ava a position as Director of Strategic Integrity, leading crisis recovery for companies that claimed to value ethics but didn't know how to prove it. The salary was more than she'd ever earned. The authority was real. The respect, unconditional. Ava accepted without hesitation. Weeks later, she moved into a sunlit office with her name etched on the door. No secrecy. No hiding. No one questioned why she belonged there. The final twist came quietly. A handwritten letter arrived one evening. No return address. She recognized the handwriting instantly. Ethan. I lost everything I thought mattered, the letter read. But in losing it, I finally saw who I was, and who you always were. I'm sorry it took your destruction for my awakening. Ava folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Some apologies arrived too late. And that's okay. Across the ocean, Lillian Monroe faced legal proceedings that would drag on for years. Her name became shorthand for arrogance unchecked. Her wealth no longer shielded her from consequence. Instant karma doesn't always strike with thunder. Sometimes, it dismantles piece by piece. Ava's story, however, ended differently. She stood on a stage months later at a global leadership summit, addressing an audience of executives, analysts, and young professionals watching closely. Respect, she said, isn't granted by titles or wealth. It's earned by how you treat those you think no one is watching. The room rose in applause. Not because she was flawless, but because she was real, and because she had proven something powerful. That even when the world tries to erase you, standing in truth can make you unforgettable.